First impressions can be so very, very wrong, which is why at the Absolute Sound, we don't spend hours or days listening to audio equipment. We spend weeks, in many cases months, seriously auditioning each stereo component. And in the case of the Buchardt P300 speakers and this review, I am so glad we do. For the Absolute Sound, I'm John Quain. Buchardt is a boutique Danish speaker company, and the P300s are their value-priced, bookshelf-sized speakers. I say sized because you don't want to put these on a bookshelf, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. They're priced at $1,400 or 1,400 euros, actually. It comes out to about a little over $1,600 US. And the prices include shipping and handling. They mainly sell directly to consumers, so do keep that in mind. Like some of the smaller companies, that's the case. They are intended for people who are looking for a fuller sound out of more modestly sized speakers. These are made to kick out the volume without disturbing or distorting the lower end. That's their primary goal here. These are smooth, laid-back speakers. You won't get the high brightness of a ribbon or metal dome tweeter here. The P300s are a two-component speaker system. Well, actually, three components, if truth be told, because the third plays such a major role. So there's a 3/4 inch dome tweeter, and then there's a 6-inch paper cone mid-range or woofer driver. Those are the primary components that people would notice. But there's also on the back side of this speaker a 5 by 8-inch oblong passive radiator in the back. That's designed to really control bass response, to keep it pretty tight, which it does. But it also means that these speakers need to be positioned very carefully. So when I said don't put them on a bookshelf, they need to stand about 1.5 feet away from a wall at least, to give them air to move and to keep the sound tight and responsive. If you push them back against the wall, you're gonna get some muddy, muffled kind of response out of these speakers. So do take note of that. They're 4-ohm speakers. They have a frequency response rated below 40 down to 37 hertz and up to 40K. Their sensitivity, 86 dB, which means that they aren't the most sensitive speakers we've tested, and certainly not the most sensitive bookshelf speakers. So you want to have sufficient amplification if you really want to fill a large room with sound, which they will do. By my calculations, you want something in the 200 watts a side amplification range. These are warm speakers, but you can make them as cuddly as the big, thick comforter if you want. And to do that, I would recommend getting a tube amplifier over 100 watts a side. Should really warm these speakers up if that's what you're going for. So what's all this about negative first impressions? Well, that has to do with a break-in period. A lot of equipment in the audio world requires some amount of break-in listening time. They really need to warm up the components. In the case of speakers, that can be quite critical. As I was reminded with the P300s, my initial impression after, let's say, a dozen hours of listening was these speakers were not making a positive impression. Muddied, muffled were some of the words that came to mind for me, but I just wasn't giving them enough time. Once a few hundred hours went by, the speakers really, really came to life. It's as if they were stuck in a sand trap before, and now we're flying down the fairway. The company itself recommends between 50 and 100 hours break-in time, depending on your listening levels and what you're doing, of course. Somewhere in the vicinity of, let's say, 100 hours is a good time to now approach them with some critical listening. So give them some time. The Buchardt speakers deserve it. They're relatively neutral, although with this better bass response in a speaker this size, you can kind of get deceived into thinking that it's bass heavy. What it's doing really is more reproducing the lower notes that are often missed in speakers of this size. But again, it's all about sonic impression, but at least you won't be tempted to go out and buy a subwoofer. So let's get down to brass tacks, or some brass. So Miles Davis, The Man with the Horn, is an often overlooked album, but you'll find the first track on that album is called Fat Time, and it will give you a combination of tight rhythmic lines and the piercing horn of Miles Davis. Marcus Miller is plucking away on the bass on this track, and it's coupled with Al Foster's rollicking drums and then the bleeding Miles Davis trumpet in the track. It's a really nice balance, and it's a close but well-defined soundstage, which the speakers are very capable of reproducing here. And when Foster then goes for that floor tom later in the song, it has a really nice live feeling, which is ultimately what we like to hear. Speaking of kind of live, if you think of Exile on Main Street from the Rolling Stones, a classic album, nothing can really save the atrocious dubbing of brass instruments on some of the tracks there. But mixed vocals are actually clearer here with these speakers, and even his little sottovoce sort of asides on Exile on Main Street come out, and that kind of honky-tonk piano has a clarity of an upright. It's just right position in the soundstage. Again, these speakers are really adroit at bringing out these instruments like bongo drums, or something that really did sound live to me, as if you could hear the person's hand slapping on the skins. It's something in about the 240 hertz range, I'd say. It gives them a very distinct voicing and a detail that can be lacking in other speakers. And that's interesting because these aren't a super articulate technical set of speakers, but in that range, they're very precise. It's also really pleasant on some tracks. Something most of us have heard time and time again is Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi from the Ladies of the Canyon album. And what was noteworthy about listening to it on these Buchardt P300 speakers is it brought my attention not only to the more warmer aspects of Joni Mitchell's voice, but also to these bongo drums that were in the back every once in a while that I completely missed, even though so many times I've heard this recording. But again, it does warm over Joni's voice, rounds it off a bit. You may like it, you may not. A song that really does well on these speakers, no smirking or laughing from the audience, is something from Alice Cooper's Halo of Flies. It's the Killer album. Yes, there's a high-res version of that as well. It really has a lot of separation between the instruments on this particular mix, and that's why I liked listening to it this way. The cymbal crashes and the gong interjections, all of that comes out very precisely on these speakers. After living with a set of speakers for some time, you come to realize they're really good at a certain genre of music often. They really sink their teeth into particular tracks. And in the case of these speakers, I would say it has to be a lot of techno, if that's your thing. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. Let's start back. I'm not hung up in the 80s, but something from the Human League, not the Don't You Want Me Baby stuff, but earlier numbers such as Gordon's Gin, which is off their Travelogue album. It's been remastered as well, also a high-res version. It has this thumping yet sonorous notation of the synths, and what these speakers are really good at is pumping that out precisely and giving the stereo effect, and the imaging as well with these electronics does an excellent job. Something from John Fox, who used to be with Ultravox. He had a solo album, The Garden, and there's this track called After the Rain. Again, it's got this deep sonorous bass line combined with this sort of echoing, susurrating acoustic guitar, and these altered vocals with lots of effects added to his voice. All of that is reproduced very well on these speakers. I would say There is a little bit on the downside of these, is if you're really pumping these speakers out as loud as they can go, your neighbors will probably start pounding on the ceiling. Finish off the music examples with a little classical music from the Danish composer Van Holbo. There's a recording of some of his chamber symphonies done in 2012 by the Lapland Chamber Orchestra. Quite a nice recording. It's a little foreboding, deliberately frosty in places that one might expect. And the P300s can deliver on this with the kind of finesse and feeling of an acoustic live performance, which, if you think about it, isn't always providing the kind of detail that one can imagine. Sometimes it really depends on the acoustic space that you're in. So sometimes speakers are so technical, they can sound artificial. Not so with the P300s. Overall, you'll find there aren't any super high ringing tones out of these speakers, and they may be a little too smooth for some ears. If you like technical articulation, these probably aren't the speakers for you, but if you're looking for a warmer, rounded acoustic profile that plays for hours without wearing on you, then Buchardt has built the P300s for you. If you found this review helpful, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to our video channel on the Absolute Sound. Also, you can subscribe to our newsletter, and we also have a print edition. We love print. For the Absolute Sound, I'm John Quain.